Marcus Cole had survived 3 years on Outpost Meridian, the most remote joint human-alien research station in the Helix cluster, but nothing could have prepared him for the mystery that would unravel on an otherwise ordinary morning when he woke up shivering. His arms wrapped around nothing but a bare mattress. His sheets were gone, not rumpled at the foot of the bed, not tangled on the floor, simply vanished as if they had grown legs and walked away during the night. And Marcus sat there for a solid 30 seconds, his sleep-addled brain trying to process what he was seeing before the more pressing concern of the freezing station temperature forced him to shuffle toward his closet for a spare blanket that was also, somehow, mysteriously absent. That was when he heard the first scream echo through the corridors, followed by shouting in both English and the melodic clicking language of the Valkyran, the elegant species that shared this station with the human contingent. He threw on his jumpsuit and rushed into the hallway to find absolute chaos unfolding. Crew members from both species stumbling out of their quarters in various states of confusion and undress, all of them sharing the same bewildered expression and the same complaint that their bedding had been stolen in the night. Dr. Chen was clutching a single pillowcase like it was evidence at a crime scene, while Commander Vasquez stood at the end of the hall shouting into her communicator, demanding security footage from stations that had no footage to give. Marcus pushed through the growing crowd toward the central hub, where he knew he would find answers, or at least find the one person who could make sense of this ridiculously absurd situation. And that person was Lyra, the Valkyran liaison officer, who seemed to know everything about everyone on the station before they even knew it themselves. He found her standing in the observation lounge, her platinum hair cascading down her back in waves that caught the artificial light and scattered it like morning frost, her delicate, pointed ears twitching almost imperceptibly as she listened to the commotion spreading through the station. She turned when she heard him approach, her violet eyes wide with something that looked suspiciously like guilt mixed with barely contained amusement. And Marcus felt that familiar flutter in his chest that he always felt around her. That inconvenient attraction that he had been carefully ignoring for months because interspecies relations were complicated enough without adding romance into the equation. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying that musical quality unique to her people, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "I was hoping you might be the first to reach me, because I believe I may know the source of this morning's disturbance. And I require your assistance before the situation escalates beyond my ability to contain it." Marcus crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. "Your assistance, huh? Does this have something to do with why every single sheet, blanket, and pillow on this station has apparently grown legs?" Lyra's luminescent skin, that soft, ethereal glow that marked her kind, seemed to pulse slightly brighter for a moment, a tell that Marcus had learned indicated embarrassment among her species. And she pressed her palm against her forehead in a gesture of exasperation. "It is the cubs," she admitted quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else was within earshot. "The predator cubs have taken them all." Marcus felt his confusion deepen, because when Lyra said predator cubs, she was referring to the 5 young Valkyran children currently residing on the station, orphans from a border conflict who had been placed in Lyra's care while the diplomatic corps determined their permanent placement. And while Marcus had always found the term predator somewhat misleading for a species that looked remarkably human save for their pointed ears and occasional tendency to emit soft growling sounds when frustrated, the Valkyran had earned that designation centuries ago when first contact with humanity revealed their heritage as apex hunters on their home world, a past they had long since evolved beyond, but which still lingered in certain instinctual behaviors. The children were known throughout the station as curious, mischievous, and absolutely relentless in their pursuit of understanding human culture, which they seemed to find endlessly fascinating. "Show me," Marcus said, because whatever those 5 little terrors had done with an entire station's worth of bedding, he had to see it with his own eyes. Lyra led him through the maintenance corridors that wound beneath the station's primary deck, areas that were technically restricted, but which the cubs had apparently mapped with the precision of professional cartographers. And as they descended deeper into the station's infrastructure, Marcus began to notice something strange. A trail of fabric scraps and loose threads leading forward like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. The air grew warmer, heated by the station's core systems, and sounds began to filter through the mechanical hum of the life support equipment. Sounds that Marcus recognized instantly because they were sounds he had not heard since childhood. The sounds of giggling, of whispered conspiracies, of the pure, unbridled joy that only came from creating something wonderful with friends. They discovered your human entertainment archives 3 weeks ago, Lyra explained as they walked, her voice carrying a mixture of mortification and something that sounded almost like wonder. Specifically, they found your recorded programs about something called slumber parties. They became obsessed with the concept of the pillow fort, this idea that blankets and cushions could be transformed into a sacred space of safety and friendship. And I should have paid closer attention to their questions about atmospheric comfort and structural engineering. But I assumed their curiosity was academic in nature. They rounded a final corner and Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping open because before him stood the most magnificent blanket fort he had ever seen in his entire life. And considering he had once built what he thought was a pretty impressive pillow fortress in his parents' living room at age 8, that was saying something. The Cubs had appropriated the station's largest cargo bay, a space designed to hold months' worth of supplies and equipment, and they had transformed it into an architectural wonder that defied both logic and gravity. Sheets stretched between support beams 20 feet overhead, creating a sprawling canopy of colors and patterns that filtered the industrial lighting into something soft and dreamy, while below, a maze of interconnected chambers wound through mountains of pillows arranged with geometric precision. There were rooms within rooms, tunnels connecting distant chambers, towers built from rolled blankets that somehow managed to stay upright despite every law of physics suggesting otherwise. And at the center of it all was a great domed space lit by strands of emergency glow sticks that cast everything in ethereal shades of blue and green. The 5 Cubs stood at the entrance to their creation, their small pointed ears pressed flat against their heads in the Valkyran expression of anxiety, their violet eyes flickering between Marcus and Lyra with obvious uncertainty. The oldest, a girl of approximately 11 human years named Kira, stepped forward with her chin raised in defiance, even as her lower lip trembled. "We did not mean to cause alarm," she said, in carefully practiced English. "We only wish to understand." Marcus felt something shift in his chest as he looked at these children, orphans of a conflict they were too young to comprehend, displaced from everything familiar and thrust into the care of strangers on a cold metal station in the depths of space. And he thought about what it must be like for them, surrounded by humans and their strange customs, trying to find some way to connect with a species so similar to their own, yet fundamentally different in ways that mattered. He thought about his own childhood, about the forts he had built in the living room on rainy Saturday afternoons, about the way those fragile structures of fabric and cushion had felt like entire worlds unto themselves, safe harbors from every fear and uncertainty. He thought about his younger sister Emily, who had died in the same pandemic that claimed their parents, and how she used to insist that blanket forts had magical properties that kept nightmares away. He had not thought about Emily in years, had locked those memories away in a place too painful to visit. But standing before this impossible creation, built by children seeking the same comfort he had once sought, he felt those memories unlocking themselves despite his resistance. Lyra was watching him with an expression of concern, clearly waiting for him to react with the anger and frustration that the rest of the station's crew would undoubtedly express once they discovered the location of their missing property. But Marcus surprised them both by sinking to his knees so that he was eye level with the children. "You built all of this in one night?" he asked, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with emotions he had not expected to feel. Kira nodded cautiously. "We worked very quickly. We watched your entertainment programs many times to learn the proper techniques, but your gravity is different from our homeworld, and your fabrics do not behave as we expected. We had to improvise structural modifications." Marcus laughed, an actual genuine laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep in his chest, and the sound seemed to startle the children, who had clearly been expecting punishment. "You improvised structural modifications for a blanket fort," he repeated, shaking his head in amazement. "That is the most human thing I have ever heard anyone say, and you're not even human." The youngest cub, a boy of perhaps 6 years named Theo, crept forward with his arms wrapped around a pillow that Marcus recognized as his own from a distinctive coffee stain on the corner. "We wanted to invite everyone," Theo said in his small voice. "The program said that blanket forts are for sharing with friends, but we did not know how to ask, and Lyra was busy with her diplomatic work, and the other humans always seemed so serious, and we thought maybe if we built something beautiful enough, everyone would want to come inside." Marcus felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes, and he blinked them away furiously. Because he was a grown man, a scientist, a professional, who had no business crying in front of children over something as ridiculous as a blanket fort. But the words kept echoing in his head. We thought maybe if we built something beautiful enough, everyone would want to come inside. And it was such a purely innocent hope, such a desperately human desire for connection expressed by beings who were not human at all. The strongest fortresses aren't built to keep others out, Marcus said softly, reaching out to ruffle Theo's silver hair. They're built to invite others in. You cubs figured out something that takes most humans a lifetime to learn. Lyra had moved to stand beside him, and he could feel the warmth of her luminescent skin even through the fabric of his jumpsuit, a gentle heat that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. You are not angry? She asked, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. Marcus rose to his feet and turned to face her, close enough that he could count the flecks of silver in her violet eyes. Lyra, I think this is exactly what this station needs. We've been out here for 3 years, humans and Valkyran working side by side, and we've never actually tried to understand each other beyond professional necessity. These kids just gave us an excuse to remember what it feels like to play too, be vulnerable, to build something together that has no purpose except joy. He turned back to the children with a grin spreading across his face. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to march back up there and explain to everyone what happened. And then we're going to invite the entire station down here for the biggest, most legendary sleepover in the history of interspecies relations. What do you say? The transformation that occurred over the following hours was something Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Word spread through the station like wildfire, and while there were initially grumbles and complaints about missing bedding and disrupted schedules, something shifted when people actually descended into the cargo bay and saw what the children had created. Commander Vasquez stood at the entrance with her arms crossed and her expression stern, and Marcus watched her face with anxious anticipation, waiting for the inevitable order to dismantle everything and return station operations to normal. But instead she laughed, a great booming laugh that echoed off the cargo bay walls, and said, "My grandmother used to say that adults are just children with better excuses. I have not built a blanket fort in 40 years. Who's going to show me where the entrance is?" That was the moment the entire station exhaled. The moment when permission was implicitly granted for everyone to remember what it felt like to be young and imaginative and unafraid of looking foolish. Dr. Chen brought her collection of vintage Earth movies and rigged up a projection system inside the main dome. Chief Engineer Rodriguez contributed a batch of her grandmother's recipe for hot chocolate, adapted for the synthesizers. The Valkyran crew members, initially confused by the entire concept, quickly became enthusiastic participants once they experienced the peculiar comfort of being enclosed in soft fabric, a sensation that apparently triggered some primal safety response. In their predator heritage, the den-building instinct that had kept their ancestors safe in the forests of their homeworld, Marcus found himself stationed at the fort's central chamber, officially designated fort director by a unanimous vote of the cubs, responsible for welcoming new arrivals and assigning them to various sections of the sprawling structure. Lyra worked beside him, her earlier embarrassment transformed into something that looked remarkably like pride as she watched her young charges lead groups of adults through the maze of tunnels and chambers, explaining their engineering decisions with the seriousness of professional architects. At some point during the evening, when the lights had been dimmed and the movie was playing, and most of the station's inhabitants were scattered throughout the fort in various states of comfortable relaxation, Marcus found himself sitting in a small side chamber with Lyra, their shoulders touching as they shared a blanket that might have been his, but could just as easily have belonged to anyone. "I owe you an apology," Lyra said quietly, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the movie. "I should have supervised them more closely. This disruption to station operations was my responsibility." Marcus shook his head. "This wasn't a disruption. This was exactly what we needed. We've been so focused on work, on research, on the mission, that we forgot why any of it matters. Connection, community, the simple act of being together without an agenda." He paused, gathering his courage for what he was about to say. "When I saw what the cubs built, I thought about my sister. She died when I was 17, and I've spent the last 12 years trying not to think about her, about the forts we used to build, about the way she believed they could keep the bad things away. I thought forgetting was the same as healing, but I was wrong. Remembering hurts. But it also reminds me why I'm still here, still trying to build something meaningful in this universe. Lyra's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers, cool and slender, but surprisingly strong as they intertwined with his own. Among my people, she said, we have a concept called Valkyran. It does not translate directly into your language, but the closest approximation would be the moment when grief transforms into gratitude, when the pain of loss becomes the foundation for future joy. Your sister's memory built this fort tonight, Marcus. She brought this station together through you and through those children who never knew her, but who carry the same need for safety and connection that she once felt. Marcus turned to look at her, and in the soft glow of the emergency lights, Lyra seemed almost ethereal, her platinum hair haloed by blue and green, her violet eyes shimmering with emotions that transcended their different species. Thank you, he whispered, and the words felt inadequate for everything he was feeling, but she seemed to understand. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted through the fabric walls of their small sanctuary. From somewhere nearby, Marcus could hear Theo's high voice explaining to Commander Vasquez the proper technique for blanket arrangement, while Kira led a group of engineers in a spirited debate about load-bearing pillow placement. This was what he had come to space to find, Marcus realized. Not just knowledge or adventure or escape, but this moment of unexpected connection, this proof that even in the vast, cold darkness between stars, there was warmth to be found if you were brave enough to build it. The mega fort remained standing for 3 days, gradually evolving as different crew members added their own contributions. A reading nook here, a meditation chamber there, until it became less a temporary structure and more a permanent feature of station life. Eventually, of course, the bedding had to be returned and normal operations resumed. But something had fundamentally changed in the atmosphere of Outpost Meridian. A new ease in the interactions between humans and Valkyran. A willingness to be vulnerable and playful that had not existed before. The cubs were no longer seen as burdens or complications, but as essential members of the community. Young ambassadors whose innocent questions and boundless curiosity reminded everyone why exploration and cooperation mattered. And Marcus, who had spent 3 years keeping the world at arm's length, found himself slowly opening up, allowing connections to form that he had long believed were beyond his capacity for survival. He and Lyra began spending more time together, their professional relationship deepening into something that neither of them had names for yet, something that felt like the beginning of a story rather than the middle or the end. One evening, weeks after the fort had been dismantled, Marcus found Theo waiting outside his quarters with a carefully folded blanket in his arms. "I saved this for you," the little boy said solemnly. "For when you need to remember that someone is always willing to help you build a fort." Marcus accepted the blanket with a gravity that matched the boy's, understanding the gift for what it truly was. An invitation to belong, a promise of connection, a reminder that even the most fearsome predators, whether apex hunters from distant worlds or wounded humans hiding from their own grief, needed safe places to be vulnerable. He tucked the blanket into his closet, where he would see it every day, and he smiled, because somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the universe, his sister Emily was probably laughing at the idea that her big brother had learned the magic of blanket forts from a bunch of alien children in the depths of space. Some lessons, he supposed, were worth waiting 12 years to learn.